Welcome to Mets Hot Stove with your hosts Rob and CP, the go-to podcast for all your New York Mets news and rumors.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome to episode 4 of the Mets Hot Stove, live right here on the channels and on X. And we're getting deeper into this offseason, getting closer and closer to the winter meetings. And we got a lot to talk about as rumors, news, reports, all that fun stuff is just spilling out day by day. And there was a lot of news that came out today. But before we get into it, Chris, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It seems like the offseason is really starting to ramp up now. We have some reports of some rumors from some really credible sources. If you are listening in on the channels, and Rob and myself speaking on that in some of the videos that we had before this very stream. So it seems like things are starting to finally take place. We do have the decisions for basically all of the qualifying offers that were given out. And surprisingly, there were a handful of qualifying offers accepted around the league too. And that's something that we can definitely touch on because I know that some of those players, we talked about and there were also rumors surrounding a few of those names, particularly one in center field going to the Yankees on that qualifying offer that accepted it. So a lot of good stuff happening. It's still not really the full on throttle of like the Mets hot stove season, but we're slowly starting to get there, and that's the most important thing. And once we do, buckle up because there's going to be a lot of news coming out in a very quick manner.
Yeah, exactly. And you could just tell that it's starting to heat up a little bit as me and Chris were posting like crazy today, as a lot of things were going on today, videos, shorts, and all that fun stuff as well. But like you just talked about, the qualifying offer, uh, final finale was today. Players had to decide if they were going to accept it or not. 13 players uh, received the qualifying offer, 22 million, a little over 22 million, and only one, two, three, four, five accepted it. And Trent Grissom, Shota Imanaga, Gleyber Torres, and Brandon Woodruff are the ones that accepted it. I think there's one more, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe that's all of them. But obviously, Bo Bichette, Dylan Cease, Zach Gallen, Michael King, Schwarber, Suarez, Tucker, Valdez, and of course our own Edwin Diaz declined it as well, as we all knew he was going to. But with that being said, and this is when the offseason really kicks off, right? Because now there are actual more free agents because of the qualifying offer that they declined. Now we have to look at, all right, Shota Imanaga. We talked about him on the last hot stove. He's obviously not an option anymore. Trent Grisham. A lot of people were like, he's probably going to be a free agent. I'm surprised he took that qualifying offer, considering that he had a great year with the Yankees. And you would think he would get a multi-year deal, but sometimes you like where you are. $22 million is not too shabby in your bank account. And, you do wonder, that's one guy off the books. And obviously Josh Naylor, who signed a big deal with the Seattle Mariners out of nowhere. And that kind of leans into the later conversation with Pete Alonso. What does that mean contract-wise for Pete Alonso? Is that good or bad for him? We'll definitely get into that. But, Chris, I want to get your thoughts on the qualifying offers and the players that accepted it. Were you shocked by any?
I was really shocked about Imanaga's decision because you have a guy where, I know that he had a little bit of a drop off, and this is a guy that I talked about on my channel. He had a little bit of a drop off from year one to year two. The home run balls, like, everyone that was not in favor of the Mets pursuing him would probably tell you, he's a lefty, gives up too many home runs. And I understand all that, but, he's only got 2 years in the major leagues, right? And so he had that second year of hitters adjusting to him, but he hasn't gotten that opportunity to make the counter adjustment and really solidify himself as a force. I think with the 2 years that he even posted, because year two, statistically all around, I know that he faltered in the postseason for the Cubs, and I understand that. But I think with what he's posted collectively in his first 2 seasons, that was going to set him up for another long-term payday, and to kind of bet on himself and double down and take that 1 year for 22 million. I understand it is 22 million. It's a lot at the end of the day, but I was kind of surprised that Imanaga took it. And Grisham, maybe not so much because I know that he put 30. Listen, I will say Grisham, yes, I am surprised. I think a lot of Yankees fans and maybe even their front office was surprised too. I'm
Right.
not sure why they gave him the qualifying offer with the chance of him taking it because I'm sure that they would have looked at bigger and better things to sort of solidify their outfield. And now they're kind of handcuffed there, especially with that money coming onto their books for 2026. But, even with him putting 30 plus home runs over the fence, it's Yankee Stadium. He hit 235. I'm sure other teams knew this going into his free agency. Like, yeah, he's a lefty playing at Yankee Stadium. He's definitely going to be putting a lot of home runs over the fence. I didn't really buy too much stock into the Trent Grisham train, and I know that a lot of other people in this fan base didn't either. So I think that more so it was a surprise from perhaps the Yankees organization front than it was from my front. So yeah, I don't know. I'm actually thankful because I saw a lot of rumors out there kind of linking the New York Mets to Trent Grisham, and that's the last thing that I wanted as a solution to center field. And I think out of all those players, Woodruff with the injury history, and who was the other player that you said was the last player?
Good question. Who was it?
Anyways, even with that, as you search for that, who is it?
Woodruff.
Woodruff, Imanaga, Grisham. Is there a fourth?
Gleyber Torres.
Gleyber Torres. Okay. Yeah, see, I guess it doesn't really shock me outside of Imanaga from the actual production value standpoint too. But at the end of the day, when you talk about qualifying offers, it's a very rare occurrence that a lot of these players take it at the end of the day. And to have four in this offseason alone, I mean, I'm not really sure when the last time we've seen four qualifying offers being accepted around the league. I feel like that's kind of a rarity without having the actual, facts in front of me. But yeah, I think Imanaga was my biggest surprise. And again, I understand that he's had a little bit of drop off in his numbers. I understand that, but like, come on, that guy was definitely going to get a multi-year deal
Yeah.
with a comfortable AAV to be at least a top three starter in somebody's rotation.
I do wonder if some of the players took this qualifying offer with the uncertainty of next offseason with the possible strike that could happen with the CBA and all that. I wonder if they're a little bit worried. They want to cash in now because if they do sign a contract and they're not getting paid, maybe they're just like, let me just get a big payday. They don't want to go through the offseason losing out on that 22 mil. And then a lot of teams might be shy to give certain deals because of the CBA that might be coming up. They might be a little wary about doing it. But again, that's yet to be determined. But you know what? Listen, it's nice to see that some players took it because, again, when you have good seasons with your team, why not stay with them sometimes? I never understood why players, like bolt out of here, out of their teams, like it's nothing, like it doesn't mean a damn thing to them. Like all their post game interviews, all their, on field interviews and stuff like that after games. And they always seem like they love it there and all that fun stuff. And we have one of our own in Pete Alonso, how fast is he going to bolt to Boston if they give him a 6-year deal? You know what I'm saying? So it's something that you always have to look at. But it is interesting because Cody Bellinger, I don't know if he's going to be a Yankee anymore, considering that Trent Grisham is back. All right, so let's get into the Mets news officially when it comes to what we just talked about. The Mets DFA and Frankie Montas, we both did. I think we both did shorts about it not too long ago, and of course Diaz declined qualifying offer. This was interesting because the Mets had to pay. Obviously, insurance will cover it, but they had to pay at least a portion of the $17 million that Frankie Montas is owed. And you would think that the Mets would have just kept them on, but I guess it's some roster implications and all that stuff. I don't know, the ins and outs of the contract and all that. What's the Mets could have been saving money on the back end or whatever it might have been. But that news came out of nowhere, and you have a good reason why you think they did it.
It's the 40-man roster spot implication because the corresponding move was protecting Nick Morabito, who's a Mets prospect, from the Rule 5 draft. And so there's no reason when this guy is going to be rehabbing from Tommy John surgery all of 2026 to have him on, your 40-man roster and taking space away from that. So I'm not sure if the Mets do save any money given that he's rehabbing. They gave him that player option with the contract, which is kind of stupid as it is. Whatever. But they just wanted to strictly save the roster spot on that 40-man, which makes all the sense in the world. There's no sense in if you're already paying the guy, you might as well just free up the roster spot, and that's all it was. Nothing more, nothing less. That's what it was.
Yeah, I thought it was just that. I know I saw something quickly. I knew it had to be. It just seemed like a roster spot. It just made a lot of sense for the Mets to do so to protect a player or two. But now in this case, Morabito. So that was a quick topic because who the hell cares about Montas? He was terrible. He got hurt, and we all know about the contract, and we both liked it when he signed. We thought it was like, all right, back into the rotation guy. It wasn't a I mean, the money was crazy. But it was like, you know what? Got him early in the offseason. We thought the Mets were going to do a lot more, and they did a lot, very little in the rotation.
17 million was crazy for
Yeah,
Montas. That was
but we thought it was good because we saw Stearns be aggressive early, and that kind of got us a little excited. I think it was more about Stearns being aggressive than Montas being the pitcher in this rotation. Even though we thought it was a good signing, clearly it wasn't, and now that little story is over with Frankie Montas. So let's move on to the next topic that we're going to get into the news that's been happening over today, where Jeff Passan, I'm not sure because I looked at his tweets. He didn't tweet this. He must have said it in an interview, probably on Foul Territory or one of the shows. Because do you know where he said it from? Because I know a lot.
I think
of people
it was that it was written by him, if I'm not mistaken. I think
Okay.
it came from an article. Yeah.
Okay, so if you guys don't know, Jeff Passan basically reported that the Mets have a list of tradable available players on their roster, and I think everybody thought Sanger would be there, Jeff McNeil, but then you saw Beatty, Vientos, Luisana Acuna, and at the top of that list, Brandon Nimmo. Why is that important? And obviously, me and Chris both know, but if you guys don't know in the chat, Brandon Nimmo has a full trade clause. I do wonder, the Mets don't leak nothing out. Like how Jeff Passan got this, I don't know. But let's say Jeff Passan, we all trust his reporting. Everybody waits for the Passan bomb. And that's how a trade goes through or something goes through or a signing happens. Do you think the Mets spoke to Brandon Nimmo and say, listen, we might look to trade you to see if we see what's out there for you, depending on if it's a package deal or, taking on some of that money and trying to get a top prospect or something like that. Do you think they spoke to Brandon Nimmo in this regard? Because why would they make sure he's on that list and somehow Passan finds out from whatever sources he has?
Rob, I
I know.
think you and I both understand this, that I've been talking about Brandon Nimmo and how he's going to handcuff this team since last offseason. We already started talking about Brandon Nimmo and the hindrance that he is going to provide for the New York Mets from a roster flexibility standpoint. Let me preface this all by saying I have full awareness of what Brandon Nimmo has been and probably will continue to be with his bat. But I'm talking about the necessity of paying this guy the money that they did to show up and be a good defender, a reliable defender also in the field so that they can address DH elsewhere. And now they have guys who many think there's multiple guys on this team that can be suitors to be the DH. And by default for Brandon Nimmo, given the plantar fasciitis and any other injury that is hindering him. This is news because it's coming from Passan, but it shouldn't really be news because, first of all, Brandon Nimmo was not given this contract by David Stearns. This was a previous regime that gave him this contract. It seems like it's an overpay now, but at the time when Brandon Nimmo was still a center fielder, putting up the production in 2022 that he did, it was a necessity to have him come back, given the competition that was out there, the Rockies, the Giants, whoever else was in on the services of Brandon Nimmo when he officially hit free agency. But I think that David Stearns understands that probably a conversation with Steve Cohen, if there is a world where there is a set amount of dollars that Steve Cohen is willing to eat on his remaining 102 million that over the next 5 years that he's owed, then they would be willing to go ahead and find these suitors. Now, of course, like you said, the biggest thing here, and I still think Brandon Nimmo, a trade for him is not going to happen, given all the constraints of money, needing to pay the contract down, and also the full no trade clause, like you said. But I think that it's great to at least hear that the Mets are open to doing so, because they understand that that is one roadblock in terms of the flexibility of this roster and an inability to have him and also still pursue free agents outside to better this lineup. So what I'll say about this is that, I don't know. I can't even begin to speculate if they approach Brandon Nimmo about this. For a guy that's been in the organization for as long as he has, I would have to imagine, and them understand that he has a full no trade clause, I would have to think that, yes, there were some conversations being had about, is this even feasible? Should we even entertain this? Or are you just going to say no to any team? Now, what I will also say is that I see a lot of Mets fans saying, well, this trade can't happen because he has the full no trade clause. Yes, he can veto any destination that he wants to, but how do we know that he will? You know what I mean? Like,
Correct.
how do you know that he doesn't have a select few organizations out there that he's like, all right, listen, if you can make this happen, I understand. No hard feelings. Send me over there and free up the roster spot if you really want to. So we don't really know what's going on in the minds of Brandon Nimmo. That is the wild card, right? In the mind of Brandon Nimmo, I should say, that is the wild card. But David Stearns, we now know with this Jeff Passan report what's going on with David Stearns and his mind and the mind of this front office. They want to move off of a contract like that.
Yep.
They want to free up the roster spot and they want to pivot. I think the biggest thing here is the pivot to how they will address making up for losing potentially the production offensively of Brandon Nimmo, because you can't just get rid of Brandon Nimmo and then put in, a random left fielder and call it a day and expect that, for all of us to be happy. There has to be a corresponding bigger move out there. And I'll throw the name out there. I think it's very unlikely. I think we all know who's on the market that's going to be commanding probably $400+ million. It's Kyle Tucker, and we can all speculate all day long about that. I think that's far-fetched. I think me just saying that is just dreaming. But like I said, you can't just make this move happen and get rid of Brandon Nimmo and then tell us that everything's going to be okay by putting a mediocre left fielder out there. So I think that of the names that Jeff Passan listed, and I know we're going to pivot on to some of the other names, I think that Brandon Nimmo is the least likely to go. But at least, at the very minimum, with what we've been saying and what I've been saying on my channel for quite some time now, going back to last off season, David Stearns is actually thinking about that possibility because he knows that DH has Brandon Nimmo's name written all over it.
Yeah.
And that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and you know what? You hit the nail on the head with the fact that Brandon Nim, like, there's a bigger picture here where you're looking at the fact that David Stearns is probably looking at somebody either on the free agent market or the trade market that can replace the offense of Brandon Nimmo, not the defense. I mean, 90% of the baseball left fielders can play better left field than Brandon Nimmo, probably even more. So that's what I think it is. I think the fact that David Stearns is like, all right, I know my budget, because there is a budget. You know, Steve Cohen is very, very rich. There is always a budget. You have to think that Brandon Nimmo possibly trading him, and look, they're gonna have to pay a lot of that money if they're gonna trade him. But if they can save $30, $40 million of whatever's left on that contract, that can go to a player, a high price free agent, or possible trade to bring in that money on the books with similar offense to Brandon Nimmo.
Can we, that's a great point that I want to just get out of the way so that people viewing this right now understand that. So the way that I think about this, in order to make this move happen, a trade of Brandon Nimmo, it's almost like you have to sell the team that you're trying to trade him to on taking on the contract value of what he would be worth right now in free agency, right? So let's just say this, right? He's got 5 years left remaining on his deal, worth about $102 million. That is what Brandon Nimmo is owed as of today moving forward. Let's just say Brandon Nimmo was a free agent this offseason. what do you think a top offer, a top deal that he could sign on an open market would be? Is it a 2-year deal? Is it a 3-year deal? Do you think teams would be even scared of that? Or would they prioritize him being a DH and giving him a 4-year deal? But we can't play around with the AAV. We can't, because he's already set at $20.75 million AAV. So knowing that, do you think he would get a 2, 3, 4-year deal? What do you think, Rob?
I probably a 2-year deal. You know what? Maybe if
Okay,
it's a 3-year deal with like an option, a club option or something like that. But he wouldn't be getting
sure.
what he wouldn't be getting. Like I said, he had a great year that year. George Springer was a free agent too. I hated that deal. Like if you go back a couple of years ago when Nimmo signed that contract, I was pissed off. I did many videos, many lives saying I don't want to re-sign Brandon Nimmo. I knew he was going to get a long-term deal. I didn't want him back. I wanted George Springer. And yeah, Springer ended up not he's not a center fielder. I understand that. But what George Springer is, Brandon Nimmo will never be. Clutch. And I'm talking about playoff clutch. This guy basically was hobbling around in the playoffs with Toronto. Big home runs, big games. He's just a great player that performs in the biggest moments. And I'm not saying Brandon was a bad player or anything like that. It's just that you saw the writing on the wall with him. You clearly did with Brandon Nimmo. You did. We knew why Brandon Nimmo became a better center fielder. He had issues going back on balls. So he always played shallow most of his career during his career with the Mets. He was great coming in on balls. He was terrible going back on balls. So what did the Mets do? They aligned him defensively to play deeper. So it's easier for him to get to the deeper part of the gaps left and right and to dead center. That's what they did to him. So it made him look like in defensive metrics look like a better center fielder. But you know what also happened? Balls that were falling in that he usually would catch when he was playing shallower, now those balls fall in. So those defensive metrics, if you look at it from that moment when he started to play deeper, are better. So it looks like he's a better center fielder. But nobody's stupid enough, because that's the reason why the Mets couldn't leave him in center field after what, a year? That's the problem. And this is the thing, Chris. When it comes to Brandon Nimmo, and knowing that he would get a 2-year deal maybe on the market today, is just another way. Again, this is not Stearns' fault. Another way this organization, I don't think, evaluate their own players well enough. And I think it bites him in the ass time after time. Different regime, I understand that. But they do this too many times. And we'll talk about this later with Pete Alonso. I think it's the same issue. I think it's a very similar issue, even though Pete Alonso has much better numbers. I think it's similar. But yeah, I agree with you when it comes to Nimmo.
So going back to that conversation surrounding the actual contract value, if you're saying that you would think that he would get a 2-year deal in this current market this off season, that puts him right around, let's say, $42 million over 2 years, given his current structure of AAV with the New York Mets. I think that he could potentially get a 3-year deal to serve as somebody's DH for the next three years and put up 25 plus home runs and however many RBIs. So that's between 42 to 62 million between 2 or 3 years, right? You're going to subtract that number from $102 million of what he's currently owed over the next 5 years. And the difference is what the Mets are going to have to basically cover if they want to trade him. Because that's the only way that the Mets are persuading any team to bite. Just act, right? This is David Stern selling a team. Just act like this is a free agent acquisition for you. Okay, that's fine. I'll tell you at that AAV, I'm only signing Brandon Nimmo for 2 years. All right, that's 42 million. Mets cover 60 million of his contract. Are you willing to do it? If not, no deal. That's how I see things playing out in the perspective of a trade. Now, things obviously will change if you attach a prospect or 2 prospects as well onto the deal. That means more prospects means that the Mets cover and have to cover less money. But that's like in simplistic terms, that's how I see that happening with the Mets trying to persuade. Because let's be honest, Brandon Nimmo's a great offensive weapon, but you're going to have to persuade a team with that kind of money on the books to take it on. And I just don't see, with the negative value now that he provides you defensively and almost negative value on the base paths, there's really no incentive for a team to, I guess, give in to the Mets' demands should the Mets truly be in on trade talks of Brandon Nimmo. And so it's not shocking that Passan came out with this and named Brandon Nimmo, but I just still think that there's just so many hurdles and an uphill battle to climb for the Mets to make this happen. And so I would fully still expect, as of November 18th, when we're doing this stream, that Brandon Nimmo is still going to be a New York Met in 2026, not because David Stearns wants him to be, right? Wants him to be, but because the Mets just simply will not be able to persuade another team on fair terms, quote unquote, to take him on.
Yeah, exactly. And I see people in the comments saying it's the Brandon Nimmo bashing hour, blah, 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 and all that. And, some team would love to have those numbers and want him. Numbers at the end of the year are skewed. There's a reason why Juan Soto's year became MVP caliber, according to the MVP finalists, and Pete Alonso wasn't. A lot of people right here, and me and you agree, Chris, Pete Alonso technically had a better year offensively all around than Juan Soto. So why did Pete Alonso get no consideration for MVP, but Juan Soto was a finalist? See, the numbers are skewed, guys. That's why Chris did an excellent job last year of breaking down the Pete Alonso numbers. And this is not just about Pete Alonso, but it's about every player. Break down the numbers month by month. There's a lot of months for a lot of these players that everybody wants to, cry to the world about, Brandon Nimmo bashing hour, Pete Alonso bashing hour, which will come from me, at least. You have to understand, you got to break it down month by month. And this is why me and Chris always get along when it comes to doing shows. Because when Chris broke that down, because I was getting killed all year in 2024, killing Pete Alonso day after day after day. And Chris, because he knows what he's doing, and he broke it down, he put the work in. It's not just about the end of year numbers. We have to understand that with baseball nowadays. Do people really think that Brandon Nimmo had a good year this year? Why was he a ghost for how many months this year? He'll have 2 hot months, like scorching hot months, and then he'll have a lukewarm month, and then he'll have 3 cold months, like ice cold months. You can't have that as a player. That is not somebody saying, every player is streaky. Understandable. But don't tell me that Brandon Nimmo wasn't part of the problem this year with an offense that scored less runs this year than they did in 2024. And you would think they have a better core of players adding Juan Soto. That's the problem, guys. You got to break it down a little bit more. You can't just look at the end of year numbers and say, what a great year from this guy or that guy. You got to break it down more. Because when you break it down more, you understand why we get frustrated or not just frustrated, but we get a little animated or, have a little bit more emotion when it comes to stuff like this for certain players. And nobody's saying that Brandon Nimmo is a terrible player. The Colorado Rockies would love to have Brandon Nimmo, but you're going to tell me a contending team is going to say, hey, we'll take Brandon Nimmo, and he might get a 2 or 3 year deal, so let us pay that amount of money and you pay the rest of the contract. No contending team's probably going to do that unless they're so desperate for a DH, or so desperate, which, by the way, the Mets do, so desperate for a left fielder that can't play left field, who's paid like a center fielder. That's the problem. It's not about Brandon Nimmo, the player, as just the offensive numbers. It's just that you're paying him a god-awful amount of money to be an all-around player, and now he's one-dimensional at best. And there's no reason to think he's not going to get worse every other year. And he's already breaking down. That's the problem. That's the issue, guys. It's not about just bashing a player. It's just a fact when you break down numbers, how many times this year have we complained about Brandon Nimmo? He goes quiet for a month and a half. and he'll have 2 scorching hot months, and it changes his whole outcome of a season numbers wise. When it clearly didn't feel like he was that good just by the numbers. So the Nimmo bashing is over, guys. We got a lot more to talk about here with that list. Kodai Senga, Chris. Kodai Senga. I think, hopefully, I would think most people understand why he is on this list. Me, I've been done with him. I said it from the beginning. It's all smoky mirrors when it comes to Kodai. When it comes to Kodai Senga, 100%. I think it's a fluke what he did early on in the season. I truly believe that. I think when teams start to see him second, third time around during the season, he doesn't adjust. He never adjusts. Teams adjust to him. He don't adjust. That is why he performs so good in the beginning of the season and then, fades out during the rest of the season. Oh, by the way, he often gets injured as well. And with all that being said, the last 3 weeks of the season, what did the New York Mets need to make the playoffs against the terrible Cincinnati Reds? What did they need more than anything besides wins? They needed somebody to start games because there wasn't enough. Injuries, bad pitching. They needed somebody who was actually, healthy, that had their arm attached. Kodai Senga wasn't injured. He just couldn't figure out his quote unquote mechanics, which I think is just horseshit. He gave up on his team. I don't want that guy back on our team. I just don't. Trade him. Trade him and get somebody else in this rotation. Because I'm sick and tired of Kodai Senga that he's so great, apparently, that you have to change your whole complexion of a rotation for extra off days, having a 6-man rotation. Not every pitcher, why does every other pitcher have to suffer? Because not every pitcher likes to be stronger on their day-to-day pitch because of the extra day. So you're weakening your rotation, or you're hurting other pitchers in your rotation because of Kodai Senga. You can't do that for one player, especially a guy who basically screwed you at the end of the season and basically didn't even help this team at the end of the day when they needed him the most, when they clearly needed the pitcher. I'm sorry. I trade him, Chris. I don't know about you, but he's got to be gone. I don't want him in this rotation.
I still think it depends on how far David Stearns is willing to bolster this rotation in terms of getting top arms in here. I think if you're thinking about only getting one top arm, then you kind of need Kodai Senga to be that sort of consistency in the first half, at least in the back end. I'm not like, if you're selling me on a rotation where Kodai Senga is anything but your number 5, then I'm not buying it, and I'm kind of going into 2026 skeptical. But as a number 5 at the very minimum, given the young talent, given, hopefully a rebound of Sean Manaea, that's a very big if, and maybe the next top arm that you bring in, okay, then your hand is forced. But I really do think a lot of these reporters, and Jeff Passan's report today just solidified it, but Bob Nightingale even was kind of alluding to it, that the New York Mets are not thinking about just one top arm. They're thinking about 2 this offseason. And if they are thinking about 2, that means Kodai Senga is more than expendable. And that's just the bottom line. And so you see this list that Jeff Passan dropped. I made a video about it. If you missed, I actually dropped 2 videos today. One about Tyler Rogers, one about this Passan rumor article that he dropped, right? So check out my description if you're listening on my live stream. I'll link those in the description. But the one thing here is that Passan said, okay, all these guys are available. He named Luis Angel Acuna, Mark Vientos. We have to talk about Brett Beatty. We already talked about Brandon Nimmo. I forgot if he named one more. Jeff McNeil, he named in there. We've already known that the Mets might try to move Jeff McNeil. But of all these guys, Kodai Senga was the only one that he was willing to go out there and say, the Mets are not just making him available. He is extremely available, meaning it would be a surprise if he is not gone. And so again, if that's the case, I'm not saying that what Jeff Passan is saying is gospel, so to speak, right? Because he could be wrong at the end of the day as well, although he is one of the more credible reporters that we have to listen to this early in the offseason. But if that's the case, that gives you an idea of how aggressive the Mets might be looking to be in terms of trading for that one frontline starter, whatever the name might be, and then maybe also going out there and pursuing a guy like Dylan Cease or Tatsuya Imai in free agency to give you your two arms that can make Kodai Senga expendable via trade. And it doesn't even matter what you get in return at this point. It's an expiring contract, and you're just freeing up the roster spot there. Although I will say, I will disagree just a little bit. If Kodai Senga is not traded, I think that I would like his role to be reduced in capacity, but I still think he would have a little bit of a role. He would have at least some value on this team. But I think that the pros or the cons outweigh the pros here. And I would also agree with you, Rob, that I would prioritize moving Kodai Senga out of this organization this season or this offseason.
Exactly. So again, let's just hope that these signs, that all these news and rumors, when it comes to all this possible change of culture or change of roster construction, is a sign of Stearns being aggressive and putting on his big boy pants, because that Steve Cohen money is mighty heavy, and you just hope that he's finally realizing he's in a big market and he gets that going. Let's hope these signs are what we might see in the future, which would be nice. So again, next on the list is Brett Baty. And this is something, guys, that we talk about a Brett Baty topic last year this time. 99.9% of Met fans probably want Brett Baty off this team if we were talking about Brett Baty last year. Next year, we're talking about him right now on November 18, 2025, and he had a really good season. You remember, getting sent down, coming back up, you finally seen the potential of Brett Baty. This is a guy that I always had his back. I liked Brett Baty. I felt like he got a raw end of the deal on opening day when he clearly won the job against Luisano Acuna, but Luisano Acuna had to play on opening day because of a lefty, which already irked me from day one of the season while I was in Houston in the hotel room when we had the first pregame of the year. This is a problem where, and this is a situation where this entire list, when it comes to what Passan reported, I already said this. Do what you got to do. If everybody on this list gets traded for players that can help us, I don't care. Nobody's off limits, to be quite honest with you. You can't win 83 games and miss the playoffs with all the potential and being big contenders, and you're going to tell me that somebody's untouchable? I don't care. This whole list can go if it brings back better players, but realistically, it's probably not going to happen with all these guys. But Chris, with Brett Baty, we talked about it from day one. Last year, most Met fans wanted Brett Baty gone because he was a bust. He had a really good season this year, getting sent down, all that. I was pissed off that he didn't start on opening day when he won the job clearly over Luisano Acuna when McNeil got hurt. And he didn't start opening day because of, quote unquote, our favorite word, matchups. Those are stupid. From time to time, yes, but put the better player out there. I'm sick and tired of, we got to put in a righty who is not as good as the lefty we usually have in our starting lineup. So let's put the righty in here who is a worse player. It's just stupid. So this is an interesting topic with Brett Baty, because I think we all can agree that Brett Baty can play second or third, depending on what the Mets do with McNeil, Vientos, whatever, who is also on this list, by the way. I'm open to everything. Do I want to trade Brett Baty? No. But what are we getting? That's the important part, right? It's not about losing Brett Baty. What are we getting to make us better? And if that means getting rid of Brett Baty, I'm on board, but it has to be the right trade. It has to be the right player or in the right package, so to speak, because the list is weird because we're talking about, trade Brett Baty for this, trade Senga for this. Some of these guys can be in a package as well, obviously. But the way to list, it seems like everybody's doing like individual trades with individual players. When some of these guys can be packaged, which is a whole new outlook on possible trades that could happen.
A lot of Mets fans wanted to crown Mark Vientos the third baseman of the future after 2024.
Yep.
Now a lot of Mets fans want to crown Brett Baty the future of third base after 2025.
I'm not.
I understand being hyped about these guys that we've been waiting for so long to get the chance, right? And seeing them have good seasons. But we need to also just temper our expectations on what we realistically can expect from them moving forward. Brett Baty has all the potential in the world. I'm not denying it. But if you're telling me that Brett Baty is a deciding factor of getting you a top line arm, an ace via trade, because this team really wants a controllable, young, potentially up and coming third baseman, I'm sending Brett Baty in a trade all day long, because the Mets have the farm system to recuperate from losing Mark Vientos and Brett Baty. They do. They have 8 top 100 MLB pipeline prospects. They are the number one team with the most top 100 prospects, and a handful of those have the ability, actually a couple of those have the ability to play third base. But even given that, dude, you're probably talking about backfilling third base externally anyways, right? I mean, with the whole Red Sox situation, if you don't get Pete Alonso, the Red Sox probably will get Pete Alonso, and therefore Alex Bregman is out there for the taking. You trade Brett Baty, you get Alex Bregman. Is anybody really crying about that? Because I won't be. I will not be whatsoever. And that's just the bottom line, because theoretically, you'll have Brett Baty going in a trade for a top arm, and you backfill that third base spot with Alex Bregman. And it works out at the end of the day. And so I just want to I know that there's a lot of Mets fans that are fans of certain players and certain players only. There's a lot of Jeff McNeil fans out there that are like, do not trade Jeff McNeil. We've been hearing it for the past few seasons at all costs. Now that's transferred over to Brett Baty because he had a really good season. I get it, right? These guys are easy to root for. They're likable, whatever. Whatever draws you to them, that's fine. But you're not going to tell me that with what Brett Baty put up, yeah, he hit 18 home runs. OPS was mid 700s for the first time in his career. I'm not crowning him the third baseman of the future without at least seeing what I can get for him in a potential trade package to bolster my rotation. And that's just the bottom line. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not me saying that Brett Baty is a bad player. I was wrong about Brett Baty. I had my doubts that he was going to bounce back the way that he did in 2025. I give him all the credit in the world for doing so, especially in such a tough market when a lot of Mets fans were asking, does this guy have the capacity to perform in a high-end market like New York? And he proved everybody wrong, including me. But I'm still not going to shut the door on making my team better because I need to keep Brett Baty. That's just not how this works. And I think that David Stearns also, if this list is correct from Jeff Passan, also understands that there are a lot of ways to backfill Brett Baty's position if they end up letting him go via trade. And I made this video a couple weeks ago. This shouldn't surprise anybody. It doesn't surprise me that the Mets are listing on offers on Brett Baty. They told you all, told everybody in this fan base that they were shopping Brett Baty this past trade deadline. When they wanted, they didn't want to because they didn't do it. And thank goodness they didn't with the way that this whole thing played out. But they discussed a one deal with the Yankees that would send Brett Baty to the Bronx in exchange for Trent Grisham at the time. Can you imagine how bad of a trade that would have been, first of all? But second of all, just including him and floating his name out there this past season was an indicator as it is. And so, yeah, I don't think that what Brett Baty produced is enough to make him an untouchable prospect or an untouchable player because he's graduated from that prospect status on this team. I'm sorry. It is what it is. There's a handful of ways to replicate his production defensively and offensively, and that's just the bottom line. You can be a fan of a certain player. I have certain players on the Mets that I like, and I'm a Pete Alonso fan. I'd like to see Pete Alonso be back, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Pete Alonso is not replaceable. I haven't done it this offseason so far. Will continue to not do it. I think Mets fans have to graduate from this. Let me root for this one player and one player only, and realize that a lot of these guys, minus maybe Edwin Diaz, because he's really not replaceable in my mind, a lot of these guys are replaceable. That's just the bottom line.
Yep, and exactly. And yeah, I love Alex in the comments saying I'm a Debbie Downer. I mean, what is there to be up about? The Mets missed the playoffs with all the expectations. Like, stop acting like we should be positive when what positive is there right now? There is none. This team needs an overhaul. Like, let's stop acting like this team won the World Series and we're celebrating. We wouldn't have Debbie Downer shows if this team actually did what they're supposed to do, including the organization who run things. So you got to understand that as well. Sorry, Chris. But yeah, exactly with Brett Beatty. That's look again. There is no guy on this list that I would not trade, and that's obvious. So Jeff McNeil is the obvious one too. We always thought he was going to be on the market. I don't think there's really much to talk about, Chris, unless you have something to bring up. He's not the average guy he was a couple of years ago. If he was, it might benefit the team more, in my opinion. I think him changing into a quote unquote power guy, which he's not, hurt this team because you got a guy like Brandon Nimmo who was an average guy, an on-base guy, both decided to hit more home runs. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but how did that really help the Mets? I think it hurt them because it makes their lineup just not situated right. How many times have we talked about, why Lindor shouldn't be leading off? Like, the common sense thing, he shouldn't be leading off. Like Nimmo and McNeil should. But because Nimmo and McNeil aren't the same player as they were a couple of years ago, is the reason why this core probably needs to be broken up a little bit. Because the lineup doesn't suit itself in the top one or two guys in the lineup, or at least the leadoff guy. There's no reason why Lindor should be leading off. It would be nice to have your better players 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Because then you got to put Brandon Nimmo 5th or McNeil 7th, and it just messes up the lineup. And I think it messed up what the Mets are trying to do. And it's not Stearns' fault per se, but in general, I think changing their mechanics and changing their way of hitting hurt both of these players, in my opinion. Yes, Nimmo has better numbers, but what the Mets need from these guys, especially when you had Alonso, when you had Lindor, and now you had Soto, you need guys to actually get on base for them. How many, there was a lot of solo home runs because these guys were constantly at the plate with nobody on base. And why is that? Because your best hitters were so pushed up early in the order that it just messed up everything, in my opinion. And again, I don't care about Jeff McNeil. He can be on this team or not. If Jeff McNeil's on this team, he's going to be a role player, and because he can play multiple positions. Other than that, see ya.
It's an expiring deal too. It's just a common theme here when you talk about Senga and McNeil, right? I mean, I know Senga's a pitcher and McNeil's a position player, but a guy that's getting owed or is set to be owed $15.75 million. That's a complete overpay for Jeff McNeil as it is, because that's not what he's going to produce for you in a single season. But also he's an aging player. He's got 1 year left on his deal. I think he has some sort of option. I think it's a club option maybe attached to the back end that the Mets, I would have to imagine, are going to decline. I have to look at Spotrac if that's true or not, but I think it is true. But yeah, man. And like you said, so we are now at a threshold here with these prospects where it's like it's time to make a decision on some of these names, because I hear Mets fans say this all the time. Do not trade Jet Williams, right? You can't trade Jet Williams. Don't even think about it. All right. So, like, okay, so that's fine. We won't trade Jet Williams, but how about this? It's now Jet Williams' time to be a contributor at the major league level.
Yep.
And so the position that he will probably be overtaking is probably being the successor to Jeff McNeil at second base. Something has to give here, right? Jeff McNeil fans that are also Jet Williams fans that don't want to see both go can't have both. You can't have both. It's not feasible. It's not feasible. So some of these prospects like Benj, like Williams, like we'd already seen these pitching prospects are going to have to graduate to make room for the next set of prospects that are willing to come up and are trying to make their case in AA and AAA. And so I think that Jeff McNeil is completely expendable. I don't think that anything that Jeff McNeil provides you, mediocre outfield defense, right? Like I get that he's a versatile player, but like I'm not gonna nobody's batting an eye about the way that he plays outfield. It's just a guy to stick out there. He's just got thoracic outlet syndrome surgery,
Yep.
right? He's like 33, 34 years old. This is the most expendable guy of this entire list, I feel like, of what passed and dropped. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said about, Jeff McNeil. Appreciate his time as a New York Met, but objectively speaking, if you're trying to make this team better in any facet, then I think that you have to try to get Jeff McNeil out of the door because I don't think that he fits on this team in 2026 with the prospects coming up and just the overall ability. Not to mention, if Brett Baty sticks around, I would much rather see Brett Baty at second base and take that position over and keep our options open at third base rather than committing to Brett Baty being the third baseman of the future. And that's just the bottom line there. So, I think Brett Baty has a lot to say about Jeff McNeil trade upcoming this offseason, but apparently both are up for trade too, according to Jeff Passan, and what the Mets have either leaked or he's assuming they have leaked too. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there's just so many moving parts right now, and it's kind of hard to see how this all plays out. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's what has a lot of Mets fans worried. And that uncertainty is the reason why a lot of Mets fans are like, no, we have to keep these guys because like they can't even think of a plan they don't think that this front office has a plan to truly replace these guys. That's the fear of uncertainty right there. And at this point, what do we have to fear? We're coming off of a season where we missed the playoffs. There's nothing to fear. It can't get any worse than that. It cannot get any worse than that. And so I see a lot of fans after the season saying there's no way we can bring a replica of the 2025 team back. There has to be, I think Jody said it too, an overhaul. Like these names being included, whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable including some of these names in trade talks, it's good because that points toward a willingness to complete an overhaul. And that's at least what I'm happy about in hearing this report, that the Mets are open to doing.
Exactly. If the Mets were openly, if this list was true after the 2024 season, we would be concerned because, like, hey, we just had a great season. Why are you trying to, completely change this roster? But when you have a shit season like you did this year with all the expectations, this has to happen. And this is start of a good sign, as me and Chris were talking about and agree with. So Mark Vientos, Chris, another one on the list. What again, he lost his job. Didn't deserve to keep his job. I don't know. I mean, would you keep Vientos to be the everyday DH? Can you trust him? Because he can hit righties, he can hit lefties when he's on. But can you afford to keep him as the everyday DH if you're going to think about somebody at second or third or just trade him?
You can absolutely give Vientos another crack at DH. Is that my number one option of what I want? Absolutely not. That's not what I want. Would I understand the rationale of why they do it? Yeah, sure. Like, fine. Okay. But if that's the case, Like that's where I push back on it too, because like I don't want a lineup that possesses both Brett Baty and Mark Vientos again. I don't think that's the best thing for the New York Mets. I think it has to be either one or the other getting moved this season. And I think that a lot of people right now would probably prefer Brett Baty stick around over Mark Vientos. I think that's probably the objective consensus, right? Although you can argue Mark Vientos' bat has higher upside, we just didn't see it in 2025. And with the lack of versatility that Mark Vientos provides, unlike Brett Baty, Brett Baty is going to give you, I think, the higher return of the two names, because Mark Vientos is the definition of a one-dimensional player. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it has to be either or. That's the way that I would approach it if I was David Stearns. I think the common denominator here is leaving third base open, depending on what Pete Alonso does. Again, at this point, I would give it a 50-50 chance that Pete Alonso returns to the New York Mets. That's what I would give it at. There's a lot of rumors circulating, and you will get into it. I'm sure we'll talk about Pete Alonso here in just a second, but there's a lot of rumors circulating about the Mets' approach to these negotiations with Pete Alonso. And so if that's the case, if Pete Alonso does walk away, I'm not positive the Mets will backfill first base in free agency. I think they might give Ryan Clifford, whether I think that's the right move or not is a different topic. I think Ryan Clifford could be up for that spot. But that means you have to go ahead and prioritize a competent third baseman. Somehow, some way. I don't know if Mr. Ramirez in Cleveland is available, but that could be another option that you can potentially pursue. But I don't care. Bregman, Ramirez, I do not care. You cannot leave. If you lose Pete Alonso, Brett Baty is not your third baseman. That's what I'm going to leave it to. That's as simple as that. Pete Alonso leaves, Brett Baty is not your third baseman. And so that's where I'm like with Mark Vientos. It might just be a little bit easier to try to persuade teams that he could be a staple in somebody else's lineup and maybe get a pitcher in that manner, even if that means that you have to attach a little bit on the back end in terms of prospects. So yeah, I don't know, man. This is a tricky merry-go-round that David Stearns has to answer here.
Yeah, doesn't this list sound familiar though? 3 out of the 4 players that the Mets should have looked to trade at the trade deadline, they're back on this market in the offseason. So it shows you David Stearns didn't want to pull the trigger for whatever reason. Remember I said 2 out of the 4 needed to go, and 3 out of the 4 are here now, and Mauricio is obviously not part of this list. So last but not least, Luisano Acuna. That was your guy, Chris, earlier in the beginning of the year. I had a problem with Luisano Acuna. I think he's a role player. To be quite honest with you, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You need role players on your roster, but a role player should not be a top 5 prospect, in my opinion. You didn't portray him as a role player, bringing him up and hyping him up and, getting him from the Rangers. It wasn't the case. And you have that. This is where I think people are going to probably get annoyed at me again. Luisano Acuna, I don't think if he don't learn how to hit for average, his speed is nearly pointless as a starting player. It matters on the base path, pinch running, very good defensively, but you have to understand if he doesn't learn how to hit for at least a decent average, and his on base doesn't go up, and then strikeouts continue to rise, that speed and that production he can provide with his legs means nothing. You can't bat 220 and think that you're going to be, a speedster on the base path and your on base sucks. You're not going to be a very good player. You're basically a bench player and a role player. The problem with Luisano Acuna with this current team, now, obviously a lot of things can happen, but I don't see him being a starter. There's no consideration for me, in my opinion, for him to play second or third, and obviously not short, and not even center field. So what does that tell you? that tells you this guy is going to be a role player on the 2026 team if you keep him, which I'm not against per se, but I can't have a top 5 prospect that they portrayed as a very good to possibly great player, the brother of Ronald Acuna, and he's not even half of his brother. That's my problem with him. He's probably a better asset to the New York Mets and probably a better asset for another team. Why I think Luis Angel Acuna got to be traded 100% in a package on his own, whatever. Get some back here that can help this team in a better way. Because I don't think Luis Angel Acuna, I know in Winter Ball he's hit a couple of home runs. I mean, it's nice to see him hitting home runs in Winter Ball when he couldn't hit a lick in the pros, in major leagues. So this is probably going to be, on the negative end here when it comes to Acuna, but I don't trust him when it comes to a start and roll. I can't even put him over Vientos, even though I'm not a big fan of Vientos. That's the problem. I see Acuna on this team as a role player for 2026. You can do better with him in the trade, getting somebody else in here to help this team long term.
And the flip side of that, I agree with you. He is definitely a role player. I just don't think that he's going to have that much value for teams if he's not
I don't know.
packaged.
I don't
I
know. I
don't think
think
so,
there's still
Rob.
hype around him where, there's a team that like the Pirates or, like a smaller market team that is trying to get rid of a player that they don't want to pay or they don't want to keep that salary. I think they would take a chance. There's always teams out there that are always taking a chance on like on those players, like the Rays or something like that.
If you if
They'll
that's
package him.
true, then I think what Strike is saying in the chat here, I think that's a perfect synopsis. Is that the Royals could be a perfect match for a
Sure.
trade of Luis Angel Acuna, two teams that have already discussed
Yep.
potential trades as recent as last offseason. I think that could be a perfect fit. But
Mhm.
in a 1-for-1 deal, right? I think you're better off packaging him. I think you're better off sending a package of Vientos and Acuna combined
Sure.
rather
Exactly.
than just those guys 1-for-1. And
Correct.
so I think that provides you a lot more value. And so that's also the common denominator here is like, is Stearns just trying to free up these roster spots, or is he really trying to build value here? And how much value can he actually get in return for these guys 1-for-1 versus a package? And so that's really what his job is as president of baseball operations right now, with no acting GM underneath him to try to figure that out. But I'm just skeptical on what the return, I guess I should say, would be of Luis Angel Acuna going somewhere else in a 1-for-maybe-even-1 deal. I think other teams have gotten a chance to see what he posted, 2 seasons prior down the stretch, and then they saw when he got a little bit of increased sample size and an ability to win a job, and he couldn't do so. That could turn some teams off and kind of give them the upper hand and leverage. And I think even coming into this organization, there was a lot of hype surrounding the name of Acuna. I bought into the hype only because I was like, maybe he could build on what he did when Lindor was injured back in that 2024 season. He didn't. Now I'm past it, right? It's all about what you can do for me when you get the opportunity. Can you seize the opportunity, right? And Luis Angel Acuna didn't. And so I think with where the Mets are at in their organization, especially right with these prospects coming up again, because that's why these guys are expendable. I'll say it one more time. If the Mets didn't have the farm system that they did right now, then I'd probably be talking about this situation in a different light. I'd probably be like, well, how can you trade Luis Angel Acuna if a guy like Jet Williams is not coming up, right? Like, how can you do that? How can you trade Mark Vientos if, you don't have a guy like, I don't know, whoever else coming up? That it matters because the Mets have built a competent enough farm system to make these MLB ready guys that are on the cusp of being true everyday players. They have the ability to give them away, and they have the ability to get value back for them and just sort of retool through the farm system and externally with what the value they get back. So I'm not surprised with Luis Angel Acuna.
Yeah.
So be it. He's a role player. I'm not batting an eye at that.
Exactly. So this list is going to be a lot to look at throughout the offseason, and keep your eyes open for these guys being in a possible deal. Maybe not just solo singular trades, but like package type deals. That would be interesting. But if this is true, Stearns is actually being more aggressive than I think some of us thought he could be. So turning on to the next topic right now. So earlier today, if you weren't, I know somebody brought it up in the chat. WFAN Salicata and one of his on his show with Brandon Tierney earlier today, and I heard it coming home from work. He said that industry sources saying that we know the Mets made an initial offer to Pete Alonso, whatever it is, I don't know, but it seems like the Mets aren't going to budge much, if at all, on that initial offer. A lot of people believe, according to Salicata and his industry sources, which I kind of was curious. I was like, am I going to believe him? No. But, Chris, I didn't message you this, but I want to say something. So, I have a friend, a reporter that, good guy, knows his stuff. I asked him, I go, have you, because industry sources doesn't mean it's coming from the Mets or any reporter from the Mets, but it could be coming from outside sources. And when they come from outside sources, you wonder where, how are they hearing that? So I asked my friend who is a reporter for a team. I'm not going to put his name out there. I'm not going to do that unless he wants to put it out there, because he might do an article about it. So I don't want to blow up his spot yet until, so he can get views and, eyes on his article and stuff like that. He said to me, he goes, I heard something similar. He goes, I'm not going to agree with everything the radio host said in Salicata, but I did hear similar things when it comes to the Mets not budging too much on their initial offer for Pete Alonso. And everybody's going to be like, what was the initial offer? Well, it seems like the Mets are doing similar to what the contract they offered Pete Alonso last offseason, but it's basically a similar setup. It's a 2-for-1. Basically what that is, guys, is where it's a guaranteed it's a 3-year deal, guaranteed the first 2 years. The third year is another player option. Now, the third year is kind of up in the air. That's where the sources get a little tricky. It could be where it could be a club option for the third year or a vesting option or a mutual option between team and player. So that hasn't really been confirmed with that part. So again, I'm not saying this is true. I'm not saying that Salicata is wrong. My guy, that's a reporter for a team, is wrong. But when you start to hear those type of rumors, Salicata has a big mouth, but he's also a good guy. We had him on the show 2 years ago on the roundtable podcast. He was a great guy, and he's cool. Right? I met him a couple of times at the Queens Baseball Convention and all that stuff. He's a good guy. He's not the type of guy to throw shit out there and just because he feels like it, just to get eyes and ears on the show. He's not that type of guy. He is the type of guy that if he believes it, that somebody's saying it, he'll put it on the air. So that's why I was like, do I really believe him? But I asked my reporter friend, and he kind of confirmed similar talk throughout the industry that they don't think the Mets are budging much. Now, how much, I don't know. But I do think they have a 3-year deal on the table with a possible option, whatever the third year might be. Club option, vesting option, whatever, mutual option. So, Chris, I'm going to tell you this. I don't think the Mets want Pete Alonso unless it's a very team-friendly deal. And he also has to DH a little bit, which I think is going to piss off Alonso more than the actual contract. Because that's not a lowball offer. I think they're going to give him between $29 and $30 million, which he got last year. I think they're going to the yearly number AAV is, I think, is going to be right on par with what Alonso wants. The years are going to be the problem. The DH part of it is going to be a problem. Now, I think the Mets are stupid. I wouldn't tell them anything about DH at first base. Once you sign that dotted line, you play where we tell you. I don't care. If you got a DH for a week, you DH for a week. If there's a better first baseman that's a much better first baseman, put him out there as a defensive first baseman. I'm okay with that. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you: do you believe these rumors? Number one, and do you believe the Mets? Because the Red Sox seem very aggressive in the case of Pete Alonso. Do you think the Mets would go 5, 6 years? Because I think they can go 4, but 5, 6, possibly 7, if there's a little bit of a battle for Pete Alonso.
Yeah, and I think that's important to also distinguish too, is that battle, like what is it? Because like you can't expect to make an offer to Pete Alonso and Scott Boras and them not to match that offer for from the Red Sox. So what's the incentive of giving your top offer to Pete Alonso right off the bat?
Agree.
That's why I don't believe what's being said, because if you know that Scott Boras is going to take this offer and go to the Red Sox and ask them to top it, why would you start off with your top 5-year deal or your
Yep.
top 6-year deal? You're going to give the 3-year deal and say, okay, go to the Red Sox. We'll see what they say. We'll potentially match it, but we might also not match it because we might be moving on to bigger and better things and keeping our options available. This is where I think that, sorry, I don't believe Salicata. I'm sorry. I
That's
just
fine.
don't believe it. I don't. First of all, I think I'm sure Sal is a great guy. Isn't he the guy that said Pete Alonso was a clubhouse problem a couple of years ago too, going back into last
Again,
offseason?
industry sources.
Industry sources said that Pete Alonso was the clubhouse problem. That's why. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, that's besides the point. But what I will say here is that yeah, the Mets are not going to make the max offer right away. That's expected for any big name free agent, because Scott Boras is going to just take that offer and go to the Red Sox and say, "Wow, look at this. You can get him for one more year, $25 more million, and he's yours." It just doesn't make sense. And so that's why it's like pretending to know. I don't want to say pretending, because I don't want to like put that on these guys that are saying industry sources are saying that, but I have to I have to go out on a limb and say they're pretending, because if you're telling me that David Stearns is giving David Stearns and Steve Cohen, by the way, are giving out their hand on how they're going to approach these Pete Alonso negotiations on November 18th, like a month away or a little bit less than a month away from the actual winter meetings, I think that's a total crock of shit. I'll just say that. I think it is. And so therefore, I think that the Mets would be willing to go that 4 or 5 years. I would be willing to go that 4 or 5 years, but I would be questioning if I would go the 6 years for Pete Alonso, knowing that if he walks, Bregman could be out there.
Yep.
I know that they're not rumored to be in right now on Okamoto, but Okamoto's going to be posted. They can go after him as well. Like, there are plan Bs and plan Cs out there. And really, Bregman is just like a plan 1A, right? Like right alongside Pete Alonso at the end of the day. And we had these same talks last season where I prioritized Pete Alonso over Bregman, and you were kind of like even like I think you actually took the side of Bregman last off season, but now I'm kind of like, all right, if Pete Alonso really is holding out for that, 5-6 year deal, that so be it. That's fine. Let's go get Bregman. That's it. And so, yeah, I don't know if I believe, to just answer that question that you posed, if I believe that the Mets are only going to give him a 3-year deal and say, that's it. It's done after that.
Yeah.
He's getting more than a 3-year deal. He's getting more than a 3-year deal. I know that. You know that. Sal Licata knows that. Your Pirates buddy knows that. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that he's getting more than a 3-year deal, right?
Sure.
I now this conversation surrounding the deal that Josh Naylor just got makes things interesting, because I think that David Stern seeing that deal go through, and a lot of these teams seeing that deal go through, that's a good baseline of what Pete Alonso should get, given the age gap of Naylor and what he just signed for, because clearly he wanted to go back to the Mariners, because I thought he would have definitely tested free agency coming off the season that he did, versus a 31 or soon to be 31-year-old Pete Alonso.
Yeah.
And I think we all know Pete Alonso is better with the bat than Josh Naylor above and beyond. But the defense, and Josh Naylor's coming off of a season where he just swiped 30 bags. A first baseman stealing 30 bases is almost unheard of in today's day and age. That is a big deal. So you talk about the well-roundedness of a first baseman. 5 years, $100 million for Josh Naylor. Vlad Jr., he's also younger. He just got 14 years for however much. I think it's about $35.7 million AAV. Pete Alonso will come in the middle of that in terms of AAV, but what is it going to be in terms of years? Are you going to see that 5-year deal for a 28-year-old and also offer it to a 31-year-old? Or are you going to say, hey, listen, this 28-year-old just got 5 years, you're 31, maybe we'll go 4 years for you. That's what remains to be seen, is how this deal stacks up. Because I know what Martino said. I know Martino said that, executives don't expect the Josh Naylor deal to not, they're not expecting it to be a baseline for Pete Alonso's deal. I think that's a load of BS. I think that Josh Naylor's deal hurts Pete Alonso in the end. Point blank, period.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And on top of this as well, I'm going to, for on the positive end of Pete Alonso, which I don't have a lot coming out of my mouth when it comes to the positive part with Pete Alonso, here's what I would do. I never said I did not want Pete Alonso. I never said that. I think people seem like I just don't want him. I don't want him for those amount of years and all that money, because it's going to be a disaster those final couple of years. I just assume it will. But here's what I would do. I would offer him 4 years with a club fifth option. I would not go higher than that. So a guaranteed 4 years with a club option for whatever amount of money. I don't really care about the AAV. I don't think the Mets care about the AAV. They worry about the years. This is where I don't think Pete Alonso is coming back. I think, again, a desperate team like the Red Sox and a desperate team like the Reds, who are willing to spend money this year, I think are going to go 6 years easily. I think they're going to start with 5 years. Maybe 4 just to kind of match a Mets offer or something like that. But go to that 5th or 6th year guaranteed, that I don't think the Mets are even thinking about going for Pete Alonso. That's the problem. So do I think Pete Alonso will be a better player for the Mets than anywhere else? It's hard to say. Yeah, I could say that now because he's never played anywhere else. But you want to see him on, with the Green Monster at Fenway Park? I mean, Jesus. Like, ballparks matter as well, even though you only play, 81 games a year in your home ballpark. But I just don't see the Mets going past the 4th year guaranteed. I just don't. And I think that's where we're going to, find out how important is Pete Alonso to the overall quote unquote culture. Because we didn't say that. Stern said that. The culture shift, the change needs to happen. Unfortunately, Pete Alonso's in that bracket or in that core that is easily, obtainable or removable from that culture, unfortunately. And I don't think Pete Alonso's a bad guy. I don't think he's a cancer, clubhouse cancer. But when you can make changes, what's the easiest one to do? The guy who's a free agent. And if you think that he is part of the culture change that you want, if it's right or wrong, we won't know. But we also won 83 games with Pete Alonso having a really damn good year. So it just puts into perspective that, yes, it's not just one player. But he's been here through a lot of choke seasons, a lot of bad seasons. He's part of that. Just because people don't like to throw Pete Alonso in that loser bracket, he was the face, along with Jacob deGrom, with choke seasons, losing seasons, bad seasons. So when everybody wants to give all the credit to the face of the franchise, give the blame when things go bad. Because Pete Alonso had always the opportunities to become the leader of this team for years, before Lindor, before Soto, before Marte. He never took that leadership by the horns. Not saying that is going to make or break a team. They could have won 90 games if he was a leader. But there's something something with this leadership thing that it seems like there's one body, 3 heads. Lindor's a leader. Marte's a leader. Alonso could be a leader. Maybe Nimmo, 4-headed monster. When that when nobody knows who to go to as a leader, and they got their packs, because Chris, we've talked about this many times over the years. We've always seen with this Mets team, everybody notices it. When Soto hits a home run, he goes to that group, that clique. Pete Alonso goes to that clique. You know, you see different cliques. Lindor has his own clique. You see the problem here? This team has like subgroups in this clubhouse. And I think it's a problem. And that's when we talk about culture change. I think there's something to this overall clubhouse that is an issue. And does that mean the Mets are not going to pay Pete Alonso the years and money because of just that? No. I think the defense has a lot to do with it as well. As Stearns was not shy to say, run prevention was a huge problem for this team. He wants to change that. Pete Alonso isn't good defensively. Don't give me the defensive metrics. He sucks. He can scoop balls. 99.9% of real first basemen, starting first baseman, can scoop a ball. His throwing sucks. And his range is it's not terrible. It's pretty good. I would say it's about at 60%. He's not a good defender. I can't have a guy that can't throw to any bag properly. It's dangerous. And on top of that, he will be getting older over the years. So, with Pete Alonso, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting, but Pete Alonso cannot dictate this offseason. And I think me and Chris agree with that. So, next up, he gets posted tomorrow, guys. Tatsuya Imai is getting posted. We didn't think the Mets, we haven't heard anything from the last hot stove until today or a couple days ago that the Mets might be serious players in this sweepstakes for Imai. And he gets posted tomorrow. Quickly, Chris, do you think the Mets have a chance? Because it is about money, clearly.
Yeah, I think that the Mets are going to be really big players for Imai. I think that the Mets are really big players for every single one of these players coming from overseas over the past couple of years. And the deciding factor was whether or not they're going to go to the Dodgers. And so, has the Dodgers luck run out? Are they at, capacity in terms of, this talent that's coming over from the pitching side? And I think that's the biggest indicator here. Now, I'm sure a team like the Giants could use, that same rhyme and reason of the geographic location to their advantage and kind of swoop in. I think that they will be players for Imai as well. But I think Imai will be a really big priority for the New York Mets, especially if they're able to get a trade done for a true number one starter. Now, that is a separate conversation within itself because now you have conflicting reports saying, there's a lot of guys that are probably not going to be, on the trade block, like a Skubal or whoever else, right? But there's another report that I will just kind of tease it that the Twins will be listening in on offers for Lopez and Joe Ryan. So that will be something to monitor. And then I think that so let's just say they are able to go ahead down the trade route and get one really big arm, then I think that Amai is a perfect guy to go after on your own free will with your own negotiations because you dictate that contract and you don't have to give anything up minus maybe the extra posting fee, et cetera, that goes into the contract that you do give him. But also, given what this rotation needs is a guy that can perfectly slot in right in front of a guy like Peterson and Holmes and right behind your guy that you just traded for and Nolan McLean. So that 3 spot in the rotation is exactly where I would expect him to fit in. And, I haven't really heard too many rumors about this guy's geographic preference or any preference at all. And I think that we've already heard that from Munetaka Murakami. I think that it's been less reported from Okamoto. I think the general consensus of all these guys is that they would prefer the West Coast, but we've seen in years past with Senga and Imanaga, that's not the end all be all. So we'll see what happens. I think that I'm going to hold my hopes up just a little bit with Amai rather than some of the other pitchers that we've seen prior, right? Like Sasaki most recently. Yamamoto, my hopes were kind of high. I'm not going to lie. He did us dirty. But Sasaki, I was like, not again. But Amai is kind of one of those guys where I'm like, all right, maybe I can be entertained with this topic one more time here to see how this plays out. And um, I think that this would be a perfect fit. And I think that all signs and reports so far that we have indicate that the New York Mets are going to be heavily in on the market of Tatsuya Imai. And I think that he's officially posted as of today, if I'm not mistaken.
I read a report it's tomorrow, but
Oh,
it,
maybe tomorrow. Okay, that sounds good. All right. Anyways, either
yeah,
today or tomorrow.
yeah. So look, I'm all on board. Any pitcher that could be better than what we have, great. I'm on board. Like again, he's a question mark because we don't know how he's going to perform. But you know what? It is what it is. He's pretty young. You know, he's got an electric arm. Let's go. I'm sick and tired of getting these has-beens and reclamation projects. I don't need those. He's an established pitcher in Japan, right? I didn't see any major injuries like Kodai Senga had many injuries in Japan before he was posted, and that was always a concern. You didn't hear much about that here with MI. So we'll see. Again, the Mets need two starters. I think you need to round out two guys that are one at top ace that's in front of McLean, and a number 3 that's solid, and that's the top 3. And then you can mess around with your 4, 5, and 6, in my opinion, when it comes to the rotation. So, again, we'll see. So, Devin Williams, Chris, go figure. The Mets have him on their radar. And you know what? I'm not against it. I'm not, because again, you have to have a backup plan if Diaz, gets blown away with an offer and the Mets seemingly screw this one up and they lose out on Diaz. Devin Williams, we saw he had a very bad start with the Yankees. Lost the closer role, wasn't really the closer afterwards. But he was very good. Now, the Mets can get Devin Williams. I don't think Devin Williams is getting closer money, by the way. So this can be a situation where the Mets might get Devin Williams and still get Edwin Diaz, because Devin Williams, I think, lost a lot of money last year when he lost his closer role, but he ended up being a very good setup man or 7th to 8th inning guy later in the year and pitched well for the Yankees. So I think the Mets are not looking at him necessarily as a closer, but as like a setup guy or a 7th inning guy, a bridge guy to Diaz, in my opinion. I'm not against it. I think you still got to go after Diaz, and I have no problem bringing in Devin Williams. He's shown he can pitch in the 8th inning. He's shown he can pitch in the 7th inning once he figured all that out, because it is different when you're a closer going to the 7th and 8th inning, especially when you lose your job, Chris. So what do you think about Devin Williams?
Yeah, I think that this has to be an and situation. It has to be Edwin Diaz and Devin Williams and not an or situation, because Devin Williams is not going to replicate what Edwin Diaz can give you. And that's just the fact of the matter, especially with what Devin Williams posted last season as a New York Yankee after they traded for him. But if you're telling me that the Mets can boast a back end of the bullpen that has the names of Edwin Diaz, Devin Williams, Brooks Raley, AJ Minter, sign me up. Sign me up. I'm doing that all day long. And then I'll probably release a standalone video at some point on my channel talking about Devin Williams and how he fits into this bullpen as a setup guy if they do bring back Edwin Diaz. But I just look at the differences in the couple of pitches that he throws. I think it starts off with his four-seam fastball and the ability to set up the changeup. He had a lot less success with his four-seam fastball in 2025 than he did in 2024. And so, once we talk about these two pitch pitchers, like we all know what the strength of some of these guys are. Edwin Diaz is the same thing, right? But with him, instead of the changeup for Devin Williams, like Devin Williams, it's a slider for Edwin Diaz. You have to be able to be confident with the fastball enough to set up your secondary pitch to get that put away. And I think that, when you saw Edwin Diaz falter and he got hit a little bit, not this past year, but the season before that, which was a little bit of a down year coming back from injury, we were all questioning, like, how confident is he with his fastball? And even at the beginning of 2025, people are like, the fastball velocity is down. What's wrong with Edwin Diaz, et cetera? And then he really started to ramp things up. Same thing goes for Devin Williams. The key to his changeup and why it's so good is because batters also fear his fastball. And if they eliminate that fastball as being a serious contending option to utilize in any given situation, they're going to be sitting on the changeup, and it's not going to bode well for him. So, yeah, I don't think that I really don't think that this should be even a question if it's Devin Williams or Edwin Diaz. But if both these guys are headlining the back of the rotation or the back of the bullpen, I should say, I'm definitely all for it. And then I also made a video about Tyler Rogers as well earlier today on my channel. If you can somehow swing that Rogers, Williams, and Edwin Diaz,
Ooh.
let me dream for a little bit. Let me dream for a little bit. I'm ready to rock with that. I'm really ready to rock with that. So yeah, I like this a lot. I like the report. I think the Devin Williams market will still be a little bit competitive. So I'm not getting my hopes up here as well, because I do think that whoever loses out, if the Mets do somehow retain Edwin Diaz, and I think they will retain Edwin Diaz, I'm really hoping they do, but teams like the Dodgers and maybe the Blue Jays will go extra hard for a guy like Devin Williams in the back end of their bullpen. And so that's where I'm like, I don't see how realistic it is to get both Diaz and Williams. But if that 8-9 combo tandem for a guy that already knows David Stearns and David Stearns knows him very well from the Milwaukee Brewers days is able to be achieved, I'm all here for it. I'm all here for it.
Yeah, and David Stearns tried to do that at the deadline with Helsley, right? That was the idea, having two closes, eighth and ninth. So you see, Stearns was thinking about that, and with the connection he has with Devin Williams from the Brewers, maybe it is a possibility. But you know what? You can have a great bullpen if your damn starters can't go past the fifth inning. You're gonna destroy your bullpen regardless of who's there. So to finish up a couple of the topics really quickly before we end the show, Edwin Diaz said it's a 50-50 chance. When they spoke to him at the MLB Awards. I think we all agree it's probably 50-50 because we know the Dodgers are very heavily going after high-end relievers. Diaz is one of them. With Tanner Scott being a disaster, we know the Dodgers don't care if they have 7 closers that they paid. They don't care. They're going to do what they have to do, and that's the reason why they're back-to-back champions and going for a three-peat. So I think it is 50-50, Chris. What do you think?
I think the reason why this is a controversy is that Edwin Diaz said himself that it was 50-50. It wasn't like a reporter saying it. It was Edwin Diaz.
That got
And how
everybody
could he
nervous.
not? And how could he not, though? Like, it really is 50-50 because you have to think about it. In the mind of Edwin Diaz, not only are all these teams going to be in line to give you this deal that you're asking for, which has been reported that he wants a similar deal to the first, contract that he signed with the Mets in that 5-year deal worth $102 million. But also, you have a guy that in David Stearns that does not prioritize giving these deals to these relievers, any reliever, right? He doesn't care what your name is. You're not getting a 5-year deal worth anywhere close to $100 million. So I think it's really fair. Sorry. For Edwin Diaz to say that it's 50-50. So I don't put too much stock into it. I just hope that David Stearns realizes the production value that he was able to, or I hope that David Stearns realizes that the production value is something similar to 2025, and they give him that valuation. I'm not saying to just spend recklessly here. But Edwin Diaz is such an anomaly, and that's why this topic of conversation is so hard. So I'm not putting too much stock into what Edwin Diaz says with the whole quote-unquote 50-50. It's fair for him to say that, but if everything remains true of what he said before of him liking the Mets organization and being maybe prioritizing coming back if the offer is something similar to what he gets elsewhere, then I think it's a no-brainer. David Stearns has to change the philosophy, just like he has to change the philosophy on the rotation and bring back a guy that is a lockdown closer and is arguably, especially with Clase and that whole drama that's going around now, he's arguably the best closer in baseball right now. And so Edwin Diaz is going to get paid like it. And that's just what you have to do to retain a player of his caliber.
Yeah, exactly. David Stearns, don't fuck it up. Diaz needs to be back. I don't care what it's called. I don't care. Like, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that means it's probably the right deal. And David Stearns needs to get a little uncomfortable in this situation. And not just with Diaz, but in general with this offseason to get this team back on track to winning ways in playoffs. Hopefully going for a championship. So, guys, over an hour and a half of hot stove talk. And a lot happened over the last 2 days. So there was a lot to talk about, a ton of topics. We appreciate everybody hanging out with us for an hour and a half, guys. You guys been great. A lot of comments, a lot of questions. We hopefully answered all the topics that we had to get into in regards to the Mets' latest news and rumors. So, guys, with that said, have a great night. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets, and we'll see you next time on the Hot Stove, guys. Have a good night.
Let's go Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets.